Hey guys, it's Sandro here, and today's video is a head-to-head review comparing three popular SiO2 based all-in-one polishers in the form of Angelwax Enigma All-in-One, CarPro Essence and NV Morph, evaluating them in areas such as their user experience, defect removal and filling abilities, their finishing qualities and gloss levels, as well as their slickness, water behavior and chemical resistance when used to correct and protect a variety of paint types and existing defects. Now, unlike the previous review I did just a short while back that compared more standard or traditional all-in-one polishers, this review will be comparing silica or SiO2 based all-in-one polishers that contain some of the core ingredients found in ceramic coatings and that can also in many cases be used as a foundation or primer layer prior to using a ceramic coating over them. The first test panel you're seeing here is a medium to hard paint type that I'm going to be preparing with 4000, 3000 and 2000 grit sanding marks to compare these polishers' ability to remove and mask lighter to more severe defects, as well as evaluate their finishing ability on this harder paint type. Now, as I'm correcting the paint in each section with each of these all-in-one polishers, I'm initially going to discuss the user experience that I've personally had with each of them, both over the last week while testing them out side by side on quite a few panels, as well as my past experience with them. Starting with Angelwax Enigma All-in-One, it actually has a fairly decent overall user experience that really doesn't seem to cause any particular struggles or issues that would put you off from using it. But in a more direct comparison, when using these three all-in-one polishers directly after one another, it does become rather obvious that Enigma takes a little more time and a little more effort to wipe down and remove its residue compared to the other two polishers here, feeling a bit more grippy with a little more resistance. Additionally, I honestly wouldn't say that any of these all-in-one polishers have sun-friendly applications, especially when you compare them to some other non-SiO2 or traditional all-in-one polishers, as they all became a little more difficult to work with when I placed the panel in direct sunlight. But in saying that, Enigma also seems to be the worst affected and the least forgiving polish in those conditions. So as mentioned, it's really not that bad to work with overall, just not quite as easy or pleasurable as some of the others. Secondly, CarPro Essence would actually quite easily be the easiest and most forgiving all-in-one polish out of the three to work with. Its residue actually almost disappears after your polishing cycle, so there's very little to wipe off, and what's left comes off in an instant with next to no effort. It just seems to break down super easy and also seems to do what it does quicker than the others, so it's additionally quite quick, clean and pleasurable to work with. Now, as mentioned, I wouldn't say it stays that way if you're working in sunlight, and I can attest to that due to past experience. But as a whole, it really is a no-fuss, easy SiO2 based all-in-one polish to use. Thirdly, NV Morph, when placed side by side with these other two all-in-one polishers, really does seem to sit in the middle of them as far as user experience goes, being a little easier and more forgiving to use than Enigma, but not quite as quick and easy as Essence. Though I would say that it's a little closer to CarPro Essence overall. Additionally, Enigma does seem to benefit more from working it a little longer, though not too long, while Essence is quite the opposite, where a short and quick polishing cycle seems to render the best results, and overworking it actually starts to reduce both the quality and user experience, while yet again Morph seems to be more of the middle ground of the two, but not quite as long as Enigma to get the optimal results and the best user experience. So on to looking at the results in this first test panel. Starting with Angelwax Enigma All-in-One, it's actually done a surprisingly good job at eliminating all the finer to moderate 4000 and 3000 sanding marks with ease, especially with the more aggressive microfiber coating pad. And it's also removed about half of the coarser 2000 sanding marks, so all in all its cutting and defect filling abilities in this section do look rather good, and just about as good if not better than some of the other two all-in-one polishers here. But when we start to have a look at its finishing abilities, it's really not performed as well as the other two in relation to gloss and clarity levels, with quite a bit of compounding haze still present in its section, making the paint look a touch cloudy and dull. Though honestly, it's really not all that bad, just not quite as good as the other two. Straight off the bat, it's fairly clear to see that CarPro Essence struggled here to remove as many of the sanding defects on this harder paint type compared to the other two polishes. It's actually removed the lighter 4000 sanding marks quite successfully and about half of the medium 3000 sanding grip marks. But it's really not been able to address the coarser 2000 sanding marks at all with success. However, when we look at the finishing or gloss levels, it's actually done extremely well, having a much richer and more saturated finish, at least compared to the others. Though because it wasn't able to remove much of the sanding marks, it's a little harder to see and properly evaluate it. As a balance of cut and finish, at least on this paint type with the sanding marks, I think it's pretty clear to see that Morph has done quite a great overall job. Although it's pretty close, I'd still say that Enigma perhaps had a touch more cut, but Morph has definitely finished much better, and I'll also say that Essence had perhaps just a touch better finish than Morph, but Morph was definitely able to cut much better. So at least based on these results, working on a harder paint with various sanding marks and using a microfiber cutting pad, I'd say that Enigma has a slight advantage with cut, Essence has a slight advantage with finish, and Morph was more of a balance of the two. The next test was working on a slightly softer paint and addressing more typical swirls and scratches, as well as using foam pads with these all-in-one polishes for a second direct comparison. As we take a look at the results on this test panel, I think there are some pretty obvious differences, as well as some pretty close results in certain areas. Starting with cut and defect removal and finishing abilities, it's fairly clear to see that CarPro Essence has struggled here in that area once again, with quite a limited amount of cut or defect removal abilities compared to the others. While at least on this softer paint, both Enigma and Morph have done quite a good job considering how bad the defects were to begin with. But I also think it's fair to say that whereas Enigma finished quite reasonably on the previous harder paint, it's actually finished quite poorly on this softer paint, while Morph has finished rather good on both paint types. And I think it's also fair to mention that although Essence has been struggling a little to remove the more significant defects, it's actually been finishing consistently well. So after completing these two tests, what does this really mean in relation to these compounds? I'd personally say that Enigma is more suited to harder paint types, where it can in fact finish reasonably well, and is also suited to addressing more severe defects with success. Whereas Essence can finish really great on any paint type, but is just going to struggle to remove anything but light defects. And once again, Morph is really a middle ground of the two, where it may not cut as much as Enigma, or finish quite as well as Essence, but it still does both these things rather well. Next was having a look at the feel or slickness that each of these all-in-one polishes leave on the paint. Now as a whole, and as I've mentioned in the past, almost all all-in-one polishes do tend to leave a rather nice slick feel behind. However, I do have to say that at least in this head-to-head challenge, that Enigma all-in-one was a little grippy by comparison, which you'll hopefully be able to see in the footage. But in all honesty, you can actually feel it quite clearly as you run your hand over it and then run your hand over the other two. But by complete contrast, CarPro Essence was easily the slickest one here, with my coating bottle just shooting off it with next to no friction at all. And yet again, for the third time in a row, Morph just seemed to be the middle ground, though to be fair to Morph, it was still much closer to Essence compared to Enigma in relation to its slickness.
that you partner with it. I ain't tryna stop you from the love that guides you. I just wanna be the one to try you, mold you, make sure that you're on a good road. Little did you know I can get fly, 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 fly.
So onto having a look at some water behaviour or the hydrophobic finish that each of these all-in-one polishers leave on the paint. I've said it before and I'll say it again, that I've never used any all-in-one polish that has amazing water behaviour, and I honestly don't think that one even exists. But in saying that, all-in-one polishers can still have some relatively good and positive hydrophobic behaviour, and these SiO2 based all-in-ones also tend to be a little better than your more traditional all-in-one polishers in that area. Now, as you guys continue to have a look at some various water spray patterns to determine the differences in this area, you'll hopefully start to see some differences in how well these all-in-one polishers both sheet and bead the water. At the top of the list, I think it's fairly safe to say that MV Morph is consistently showing the quickest water sheeting rates as well as the best water bead contact angles with pretty much every water spray pattern. Next in line, it's perhaps a little closer between second and third place, but as a whole, I'd say the CarPro Essence does have slightly more pronounced water bead contact angles, while the water sheeting rates were actually almost on par with Angelwax Enigma, where sometimes Essence seemed a little better and sometimes Enigma seemed a little better, so it was kind of a dead heat in that respect. The last test was having a look at some chemical resistance, which is generally a good way of estimating their resistance to environmental contamination and their general durability. Now once you guys have a good look, you'll hopefully be able to see that there was some more obvious and clear differences here, with Angelwax Enigma clearly being affected by the chemical to a much larger degree than the others, also displaying extremely slow sheeting water rates after being exposed to the chemical. Next was CarPro Essence that really fared a lot better in this chemical resistance test compared to Enigma, still being affected but also still being able to sheet the water several times faster. First place here was without a doubt MV Morph, that although it was still clearly quite affected by the chemical, it was still able to sheet the water at a much faster rate than the others, showing a far stronger resistance to the chemical. Now as you guys continue to have a look at the water behavior and chemical resistance testing on this second black panel, I'll just sum up this video with my thoughts and conclusions. In many instances, a lot of these comparison tests do tend to show products that are very similarly matched, and sometimes it's even difficult to separate their characteristics. However, I personally think that these are three very different all-in-one polishers with some very different performance characteristics, which is actually nice to see amongst the sea of copycat products. Starting with Angelwax Enigma all-in-one, as far as I know, and unlike the other two all-in-one polishers, or really almost any SiO2 based all-in-one polish, it's actually not a primer or foundation layer for ceramic coatings, or if it is, Angelwax certainly doesn't make it known. Now, it's not like it's the end of the world, but having the option to apply a ceramic coating over it would be a nice thing to have, though I don't believe Angelwax makes ceramic coatings, so I guess it's understandable from that standpoint. To me, Enigma is really more of a heavy to medium all-in-one compound that on hard paint types could actually be a good option to address heavy to medium defects while still having a reasonable finish. But at least based on my testing, it just seemed to struggle to finish well on medium to softer paints, which is hard to overlook. Additionally, SiO2 based all-in-one polishers generally do tend to have slightly better water behavior and increased chemical resistance over traditional all-in-one polishers, but that didn't seem to be the case with Enigma, at least not in direct comparison with the other two polishers. So I would definitely recommend topping Enigma with an additional wax or sealant to lock its finish in for increased durability. Secondly, CarPro Essence probably is the product that started this whole SiO2 all-in-one category, so it's really a pioneer with the most history in this space. But it's also clearly not your general one-step all-in-one polish, and if you look at CarPro's description, they clearly don't claim that it is. It's really a finishing polish with an added sealant, as well as having the benefit of acting as a foundation layer for ceramic coatings. So it's just not going to remove or mask any heavy to moderate defects the way that Enigma can, but rather just address minimal defects and amplify the paint, which I have to say it really does a fantastic job at that on pretty much any paint type. The other great benefit of Essence is that after a few hours, its resins will harden, making the paint less scratch prone, so that if you are ceramic coating on a soft and sensitive paint, it can be a great way to minimize swirls during the coating process. And although its water behavior and chemical resistance seem relatively good, I'd also recommend topping it with at least a sealant if you don't intend on ceramic coating the finish. Originally, Morph was more similar to CarPro Essence when it first came out, being more of a finishing SiO2 based all-in-one polish, though it still had a touch more cut than Essence overall. But a year or so ago, its formula was tweaked to incorporate a little more cut while still retaining its great finishing ability. Now in this review, it was actually the first time I placed these three all-in-one polishers side by side, so I wasn't entirely sure how they would directly compare against each other. But as a general all-in-one polish with a balance of cut and finish, it's actually hard to argue that it seemed to be quite a nicely well-rounded all-in-one polish that also seems to fare a little better with its hydrophobic behavior and chemical resistance. Now it doesn't seem to be the heavy hitter that Enigma is, nor is it the pure finisher that CarPro Essence is, but is really somewhere in the middle of the two. So if I was to sum up and simplify these polishes, I'd personally say that if you've got a hard paint with severe defects, Enigma is the one. If you've just got minimal defects on any paint type and really just want to amplify it, then Essence is the one. And if it's somewhere in the middle or a general SiO2 based all-in-one you're after, then Morph is the one. The truth is that I like all these all-in-one polishers, as depending on what the situation calls for, each and every one of them could very well be the best choice to address your specific needs. And I actually really like the fact that they all have distinct differences rather than being the same thing in 3 different packages. In any case, I really hope you guys found this review and comparison helpful and informative. As always, please share this video, like, comment and subscribe to this channel to show your support for this content, and I'll see you guys soon.